to be recorded. We're going to make sure that everybody who registered, over 1,200 people, that everybody gets access to this webinar, because this is going to provide you with all the information that you need, that I think you're looking for, to learn not only about what is hearing loss, what is tinnitus, but what does this really have to do with your brain, right? That is what we're going to focus on today, specifically about tinnitus, right? There's a reason, if you look at the screen, I put hearing loss in parentheses, and you'll learn why soon enough, why these two kind of go hand in hand. And for those out there who are thinking, hey, I've got some ringing in my ears, I've got some buzzing, but I can hear a pin drop from across the room, I give you a huge thumbs up, because that means you're so early on in the process that it's the best possible time to get treatment. You know, a friend of mine once said, think of tinnitus as the beginning of your hearing loss journey. And if you're fortunate enough to not be experiencing the symptoms of hearing loss, difficulty in background noise, then count your blessings for today, because it is coming. And as we know in life, proper planning prevents poor performance. And I want you to apply that to your brain. I want you to apply that to everything in your life: how you eat, how you sleep, how you hear, how you do everything you possibly can to reduce your risk of preventing decline, because the way to do it is through proper planning. And so today we're going to talk about how tinnitus, the medical treatment of tinnitus, and how all of this goes a long way, miles, if you will, towards helping you to prevent future decline. And you'll notice that phrase is a little generic, if you will, preventing decline, because today we're going to review how tinnitus can actually lead to social declines, emotional declines, financial declines, physical declines, and you guessed it, the reason there's a big picture of a brain on the screen is cognitive decline. So let's just go ahead. Let's go ahead and dive right in here. Okay. All right. I know my screen is up, so I want to make sure that you are seeing what I'm seeing. Look, I'm going to dive right in, and I am going to, yay, Kim and Bree, thank you for being here. I know there was some confusion in the beginning. All right. I'm going to dive right in. And first thing I'm going to ask you now, look, this is a live stream. We can't really go back and forth, but I want you to internalize this. I mean, you're welcome to chat in and answer if you'd like. But as I travel, not just the country, as I travel the globe, I'm actually right now, I'm in the middle of a stint where I'm going 4 continents in 4 months. And if you're asking, what am I doing on these continents? Well, it's all the same. It's all about sharing the message of how important it is to address tinnitus and hearing loss at the earliest stages possible. But no matter where I travel, this number seems to be true. It seems to be universal, something that unites us no matter what country we're in or what continent we're on. The truth of the matter is 80 to 90%, and I think those numbers may be a little lenient. I actually believe the number is probably closer to 90 to 95% of people that are living with tinnitus or tinnitus are doing nothing about it. And I would love for you to sort of internalize, write down on a piece of paper what your biggest conception is, whether it's a misconception or not. What is your biggest hurdle to seeking treatment for your tinnitus? And look, it might be anything from finances. It might be you've been told there's nothing you can do. And frankly, there's nothing more upsetting than that when I hear that happen. But I want to tell you, I want to review with you what I consider to be the most common reasons. As I've said, I've traveled the globe and talked to tens of thousands of patients. And I get about the same 4 or 5 objections, if you will, 4 or 5 reasons, if you will, that people seem to just live with their tinnitus and just accept that it will get worse and that there's nothing they can do, which is not true. That's why we're here today, right? There's one thing I can promise you when it comes to the science of tinnitus. Tinnitus left untreated will get worse. It's one of those sad realities of tinnitus. If left unaddressed, it will get worse. Now, I don't have a crystal ball. Everybody's timeline's a little bit different. I've had people say to me over the course of a year or two or three, they notice we'll call it like a stepwise function where the tinnitus was down at around a 2 on a scale of 1 to 10. It was at a 2, and now they notice it's jumped to about 4. And after a couple more years, it jumps to a 6. And then it gets to an 8. And I try to tell people, look, our ideal goal is to get you as early as possible, is to retrain the brain so that it doesn't develop more intrusive, more impactful, more catastrophic tinnitus. So let's jump in. And I love that you guys are typing in here and you're giving me some food for thought. And like I said, I've traveled the world. And so I think I know a lot of your answers when it comes to why are so few people treating their tinnitus. I think this is one of the biggest dilemmas, one of the biggest questions we have to ask ourselves. Do I need a product? I have tinnitus. Do I need eardrops? Right? Go on Amazon. You'll find these crazy eardrops for tinnitus. If you watch daytime TV, you will see that there's an ad for a new pill that reduces tinnitus. Doesn't work. The eardrops doesn't work. You will find all sorts of things. You'll find gummies. You will find ginkgo biloba. You will find all sorts of magical treatments for tinnitus, of which none are FDA approved. That right there is a red flag. But I think when you go searching for help with tinnitus, we tend to believe, we tend to be, dare I say, tricked into this notion that maybe I just need a product. Maybe I just need to buy something. You know, the earliest form of treatment for tinnitus was a product, and it was hot bread. Seriously, warm bread right out of the oven, had to come right out of the oven. You cut it open, and while it's still steaming and hot, you were supposed to put it over your ears, and the sweat and the moisture and the heat was supposed to wick out the sounds in your ear. This is how long, and this dates back to the 1400s. There was mention of tinnitus in the Papyrus Ebers. So when people first started writing, they started making note that they've got some ringing in their ears. And so people for the longest time have been looking for a product, a solution to help reduce their tinnitus. And I get it. I get that as soon as you turn a certain age, and now, you know, it used to just be junk mail. It used to be you would go to your mailbox, you would grab the mail and you say, oh, I got more junk mail about some hearing aid or about some new tinnitus solution. But now they seem to follow you in your pocket, right? Now you get this junk mail, this spam everywhere in your inbox. You get it when you're, you know, circling through the news, or if you're watching reels or you're on social media, you are being bombarded. And the second you click on one ad, the internet now knows that you have ringing in the ears, tinnitus or tinnitus, and it's going to attack you and overwhelm, right? And so, but you're never going to get overwhelmed with a message of you need to medically address your tinnitus. You'll never see a message, I mean, except for from my tinnitus number, right? You won't see a lot of messages that tinnitus is a neurologic problem that needs to be investigated, that needs to be diagnosed, that needs to be properly treated. No, you're going to see some ad for a quick solution, eardrop, gummy, surgery. And all I can tell you is no, don't do it. Okay. As I mentioned, look, I love the Google, just like you love the Google. And even if you use a different search browser or you're using AI nowadays, you and I both know that if you dare search the wild, wild west of the internet for anything that can help reduce tinnitus, you will get a minimum of 2 million search results on how to best treat your tinnitus. And you'll get a minimum of 2 million different opinions, some from non-experts, some from supposed experts. So it's confusing. And that's really what I'm trying to get at here, is how confusing this conversation can be when it comes to addressing tinnitus. Now, and I see somebody already mentioned this in the chat, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much. The question is, it's really expensive, right? Isn't it really expensive? Look, I think we would all agree. The notion of something being expensive, the notion of something being affordable is personal, right? And what I mean by that is a matter of your placing value on it. I think you would agree that if you were asked by a medical professional to undergo treatment that would cost, we'll say on average, about $2,000 a year, but it will significantly reduce your tinnitus. Meaning you go from a 7, let's say you scale a 1 to 10 again, right? You're at a 7, you're tired, you're exhausted, it's driving you nuts. But over time, if you invest properly in the right treatment with the right provider, somebody who is a certified tinnitus specialist, which is all we work with at My Tinnitus Number, that it would be worth it to get you from a 7 down to a 4, maybe a 7 down to a 2 over time, right? So yes, there's a bill. I think the question becomes, what is the value of treating that tinnitus to you in your life, right? I see few people have mentioned this also in the chat, which is you've been told there's no treatment. Somebody specifically, I'm reading verbatim here, nothing you can do, just live with it. And I got to tell you, there's nothing more upsetting than this to me, because if you simply follow the Medical Association guidelines, the American Academy of Ear, Nose, and Throat Doctors treatment guidelines, the Veteran Affairs DOD treatment guidelines for tinnitus, you will see that there are very, very effective treatments available. Now, what do I mean by very? There's no guarantee. There's no promise. There never is in medicine. And there's certainly no cure. Let's get the C word out of the way right now. There is no cure for tinnitus. Well, guess what? There's also no cure for heart disease, for diabetes. There's no cure for cancer. There's no cure for most things that ail the aging adult. Unless, of course, you have hepatitis C or athlete's foot. Those are curable. So the notion of a cure for tinnitus is something that in my lifetime, I've taken off the table. I'd love to be wrong. I would love nothing more for a cure to exist today. But we have to deal with the modern medicine that we have. And back to those associations I was mentioning, they all put forth treatment guidelines for tinnitus that are found to be effective in approximately 90% of patients. And so you see my issue here, my concern that so many people are told there's nothing you can do about your tinnitus. There's no treatment. There's no cure. Therefore, just learn to live with it. When that's just not true, that there are effective treatments available that can help 90% of patients effectively reduce their tinnitus. That's just what the data says. Okay. Finally, and many of you may have seen this, right? There's now new treatments that are coming online. And one of them is this new, it's almost like a tongue stimulator. So I use the battery as almost like a joke. Imagine putting a battery on your tongue. It is certainly more sophisticated than this, but we're still not sure yet. The science is not as firm as we'd like it to be. And most medical organizations are still saying, let's wait and see. But there are promising treatments potentially in the future. Now, that's not an excuse to wait, right? Just because something may come down the line, what if it is 10 years from now? What if it doesn't come to fruition? What if it never gets approved by the medical associations as a form of effective treatment for tinnitus? So waiting is not an option. Okay. I want to make sure I make that clear for you. But this new tongue stimulation, it just shows that there's innovation happening in tinnitus, but like everything, we don't know what tomorrow brings, especially in the field of tinnitus. And that is not an acceptable excuse to say, well, I'll just wait until something better comes out. All right, moving on. So, look, I want to tell you a little bit more about why I'm here and what I've personally experienced and what has put me on this mission, if you will, to try to help educate the general public, increase health literacy on the impact of tinnitus in a person's emotional and social life, how tinnitus can impact people physically, and how tinnitus can impact your cognitive health and has the potential to increase the risk of cognitive decline and dementia. See, for me, the story is personal, okay? Because I know we can do better, right? I already told you the number. We are helping 10% or less of people with tinnitus. Sometimes I fear that number is probably less than 5%. And so that means we can do better, right? We can close shop and say forget it, let everybody suffer with tinnitus, or we can look at this as an opportunity to help so many people worldwide. Tinnitus and hearing loss impact 1.5 billion people on this planet, and that number is expected to reach 2.5 billion in the next 1 to 2 decades. That is a monstrous number. That is, if you really want to dive into statistics, it is the single most common neurologic disorder on planet Earth. Now, notice what I said. I used the word common. I did not use the word normal because there's nothing normal about tinnitus. There's nothing normal about having a little bit of hearing loss. That's like saying a little bit of heart disease or a little bit of diabetes, right? What some consider to be common, I just want to make sure that you don't make the mistake of considering it to be normal. So, a lot of people need our help. And then it becomes more personal for me because I share my story with you. And what you're seeing on the screen right now is my grandmother, Grandma Mary. Grandma Mary, who was the most active, fun, loving grandmother I knew out of any of my friends, lived a great life. Maybe, maybe did some things she shouldn't have. She smoked a lot of cigarettes. She, maybe had a couple of beers each day. She was just a normal person, right? But everybody loved Grandma Mary. Grandma Mary was the life of the party. She organized events in her communities. She was very lively, very outgoing until she hit about 70. And at 70, and again, this was a long time ago, so we didn't know then. At 70 is when her hearing loss started to get worse. Her tinnitus started to get worse. Her vision started to get worse. And you guessed it, her cognition, her memory started to get significantly worse. And from 70 to her early 90s, we watched as the decline set in, dementia took over, and eventually took her life. And what's so sad was to watch somebody at 70 start to significantly decline. And looking back, the family, were under the misconception, and perhaps most of science was still under the misconception that there's nothing you can do. That perhaps decline, at least for my grandmother, is inevitable. Well, here's what we know now, okay? According to recent reports, I'm going to give you two numbers, right? The Lancet Dementia Commission in 2024 has unequivocally stated that nearly half of all cases of dementia and cognitive decline are considered preventable. That's a staggering number. Now, I won't get into the science too much because this is a brand new report and I have to read it 3 more times to fully digest it. A new report just came out in October of 2025 that has found that as much as 65%, 65 out of every 100 cases of dementia may be preventable. Now, why do I talk about this? Because what both of these studies have put forth is a list of evidence-based data that says certain lifestyle modifications, things you can do, right? You can't change your genes. Those were given to you by your parents. They were given to them by their parents. You can't change your genetic code. And that makes up about 50% of your risk of decline. But what you can change are 14, maybe as much as 17, lifestyle factors that can potentially reduce your risk of dementia. And number one, not number 5, not number 14, not number 2, number 1, for the last 7 to 8 years is the treatment of hearing loss and as the number one modifiable factor for potentially reducing the risk of cognitive decline and dementia. So that's why this is so important. That's why I have to look back at my grandma Mary and say, what if we knew then what we know now? Maybe if we got her the proper treatment, maybe she would not have gone through that decline, or maybe it wouldn't have been so long. Maybe we could have got an extra 3, 5, 10 years with her. So let's dive in, right? Let's talk about what actually is tinnitus, because I find one of the biggest misnomers is what is tinnitus. And frankly, look, whether I ask a patient or I ask a colleague in my own industry, hey, what is tinnitus? Without doubt, 99.9% of people look at me and say, oh, tinnitus is the perception of sound. I mean, you're not wrong, but I didn't ask you for a symptom. What is the symptomatic definition? What I want to understand is what actually causes tinnitus. What is tinnitus? Well, look, unequivocally, the number one cause of tinnitus, right? Everybody thinks it's noise. Everybody thinks it's medicine. Everybody thinks it's traumatic brain injury. Unequivocally, the number one cause of tinnitus is aging. Aging, right? It all boils down to the number of candles that you have on your birthday cake. It's aging. And by aging, right? Because now you want to say, oh, well, he must mean 70s, 80s. No. The symptoms of tinnitus for most people begin in the 3rd to 4th decade of life. They become more troublesome in the 5th to 6th decade of life. So I typically say to people, the tinnitus that you have now in your 50s started in your 30s. Or the tinnitus you have now in your 60s that's bothering you, that's impacting your life, that is exhausting you, that is pushing you to your limits, started 20 years ago. And I think we could all agree that there's no medical condition that is good to let sit and foster for 10 to 20 years, right? Making it that much more difficult to actually treat, although it is still treatable. But I want to dive into how do you define tinnitus, right? Now that we understand that aging is the number one cause of tinnitus. By the way, noise would be number 2, right? So noise compounds what happens with age. Medications, be it chemotherapy, strong antibiotics, over-the-counter pain medications like aspirin and Tylenol and Advil, right? All of these compound that natural process of aging that results in disconnection of the ear to the brain. And so that's where I want to get into here. I want to actually define tinnitus, okay? And what I mean by that is we have to have a common understanding of what causes tinnitus. Now I get it. There's a lot of people out there say, but what about TMJ? What about neck issue? I'm not discounting any of that. Typically, though, in those cases, what's happening is there's underlying tinnitus that's being made worse by fill in the blank. Does that make sense? There's underlying tinnitus, which I'm going to define for you right now, caused by a disconnect between the ear and the brain, caused by a breakdown of the auditory nervous system, caused by a breakdown in the brain, basically, right? Somebody did chat it in before. Tinnitus is in the brain. It's not an ear problem, it's a brain problem. You're 100% right. Underlying tinnitus can be made worse by TMJ issues. Underlying tinnitus can be made worse by diet. Underlying tinnitus can be made worse by medication. Underlying tinnitus can be made worse by somatic neck pain. Underlying, but you realize the commonality there is there's underlying tinnitus that's compounded by everything from concerts to medications to dental related issues. Okay. But the underlying, and I want you to look at this screen here. Okay. And this is, I know, I get it. It's almost childish, but it's a very simple explanation of what tinnitus is. On the left side of the screen, you see the ear. On the right side, you see the brain. And in the middle are there's 6 of them, but those 6 represent the millions of neural connections that join the ear to the brain. Okay, there's millions of them. What happens with age, watch the screen. You see what happened there? See, there's a big difference. How about this? How about this? I'll put a number on there for you, okay? Here's a representation of the 20-year-old hearing system and the millions of nerves that connect the ear to brain. Now let's fast forward to a 60-year-old. Okay, now that's an average number. It could be 40, could be 75. Okay, here's what happens as we age. The neural connections, number one, we lose them. Okay, they literally break down. Okay, they disconnect. And here's the bad news. Okay, once they're gone, they're gone. You are not getting them back. There is no treatment for that. I don't know how far away we are, but we're far away from stem cells that are replacing these neural connections, right? Like once they're gone, they're gone. And I feel confident making that statement today that you can't get back the nerves that you lose due to aging, which are made worse by noise and all sorts of other issues, medications, traumatic head injury. But I also want you to notice that not only are there less neural connections, but the ones that remain are not as bright. They're not as vibrant. They're not as active. Okay. And so that lack of activity in the ear to brain network dims the brain. It's effectively starting to shut it down. Okay. That's an easy way to think of it, right? It's not getting what it needs. And you know what happens when a system doesn't get what it needs? You know what happens when a system doesn't get used, right? So if these neural connections are left to be dim and they're understimulated and underactive, they too will die off. It's a very simple concept. I know you've all heard it before. It's called use it or lose it. Okay. And so if you think ahead, right, if you want to, because I know you all want this answer, which is, okay, how do I treat tinnitus? Well, it's right here on the screen. Take those inactive or underactive nerves where the brain is starting to go silent, the brain is getting confused, the brain is trying to make up for missing signals and creates its own phantom sound. The way to reactivate this system is to provide acoustic stimulation. You have to keep these remaining nerves active. A cognitive neuroscientist said to me about 5 years ago, he said, Keith, so I think what you're telling me is the goal when you're treating tinnitus is neural preservation. You want to stimulate the nerves that connect the ear to the brain, wake up the brain, And you want to make sure that they stay active and alive longer to reduce the perception of tinnitus. And I said, that's it. That's perfect. Neural preservation. That's what it's about. And the way we do that is through sound stimulation. And we're talking 10 to 14 hours a day. There are some patients we have that stimulate this system 24 hours a day, whether it be an implantable tinnitus technology or a wearable tinnitus technology that will get you about 14 hours a day. Okay. Tinnitus is ultimately, and I promised you a working scientific definition, ultimately, tinnitus is a chronic neurologic condition, right? Tinnitus is not just the perception of a sound that's not actually there. That's a symptom. Tinnitus is a chronic neurologic condition. And by the way, this has been defined in the medical annals for over 40 years. Okay. Tinnitus is a chronic neurologic condition. And neurologic conditions are oftentimes quite confusing, and it's quite difficult to figure out how to treat them. But if you understand the underlying cause, which is the lack of stimulation to the brain, well, what if you do the opposite, like stimulate the brain with sound? And guess what? 90% of the time it works to effectively reduce tinnitus. Okay. So let's talk about some of the consequences of this neurologic disorder. Essentially, what I'm saying is as we age, the ear gets older, the brain's getting older, but more importantly, those nerves are breaking down, and most patients suffer from three common symptoms. Number one, as the ear to brain breaks down, tinnitus is the most common symptom. Number two, as the ear to brain neural connections break down, you start to experience difficulty hearing. So even if you can still hear a pin drop from across the room, really the question is, how well can you follow a conversation in background noise? So how well do you hear in restaurants or in other settings like that? Okay. And then last but not least, memory. Okay. So there's been a lot of literature, and I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but there's been a ton of literature in the last 10 years finding a significant connection between tinnitus and memory loss, potentially leading to cognitive decline and dementia. So let's just go through. Okay, let's go through all three of them here, right? I promise you: tinnitus, hearing loss, and cognitive decline. So, I think the best way to describe tinnitus, because everybody understands this, is think about the notion of phantom limb. What is phantom limb? Phantom limb is a scenario in which you lose an arm, be it in an accident, at war, whatever it may be. You lose an arm, but you still feel it. You think you still feel it. Well, how does that happen? I mean, on paper, it makes no sense. If the arm's not there, why would you feel it? Well, and I bet a lot of you are thinking this out there, it's the brain. The brain that perceives the missing arm. Okay, now why am I talking about phantom limb? Well, guess what? The symptomatic definition of tinnitus is the perception of a phantom sound, right? It's not a coincidence that both definitions use the word phantom, because it's not actually there. And see, what happens is, again, if you go back to the slides I was just showing you, as you lose those ear to brain connections, the brain starts to go silent. It's like losing a limb, and the brain says, wait a second, where did the sound go? Why don't I create my own sound? So what tinnitus is, if I had to explain it in just the simplest form, is your brain's way of filling in the missing input from the ear that happened simply because you've added more candles to your birthday cake. And maybe, in addition to your number of birthdays, you've made it a little bit worse with noise exposure, maybe a car accident, maybe medication, maybe you've been through cancer treatment and chemotherapy affected your ears, maybe you've been on a strong antibiotic at some point in your life that affected your ears, right? All those compound the tinnitus that is, it's a strong word, but dare I say tinnitus is almost inevitable for most people, okay? And I guess if you really wanted to ask the question, well, wait a second. How do we treat phantom limb? Well, you have to retrain the brain. How do you treat phantom sound, tinnitus? You have to retrain the brain. And you do that by stimulating the brain with new sound. Okay. So, second, right, which is just as important, I do see a question. I'm going to answer it point blank. So, with a hearing device, I mean, I don't like the word hearing device because that makes it sound as if a hearing aid is a device, with prescription grade tinnitus technology. Yes, you can improve the neural connections from ear to brain and reduce tinnitus. I mean, you could hop off this YouTube right now. You could hop off this video because there it is. That's the answer, right? With prescription tinnitus technology, especially designed this neurotechnology, which is specifically designed to stimulate the nerves with acoustic sound, retrain the brain, and reduce the impact of tinnitus. All right, moving into auditory deprivation, which is really just a fancy word for hearing loss. Okay. So I get it. I get it. I'm sure there's a lot of you out there saying, I've got ringing in my ears, but I hear great. Okay. I get that. But have you been in a situation where you know people are talking, but you miss just a few bits and pieces of what they're saying? Maybe you heard the joke, but you missed the punchline. Are you struggling to hear in background noise? Are restaurants becoming difficult to follow the conversation? Now, I know you want to blame the restaurant because restaurants have gotten louder. I don't disagree with you. But did you actually have difficulty in that restaurant 20 years ago? Or are you having more difficulty now because you're 20 years older and you are on the beginning stages of your hearing loss journey? Because there's some ringing, because there's a little bit of difficulty hearing in background noise. And last but not least, one of the scariest things is the connections with tinnitus and whether there's normal hearing or not, are the connections of tinnitus and cognitive decline. And what cognitive decline basically looks like is, you start out with some word finding, right? Oh, name finding issues. Like, give me that thing. I got to write something. The thing you write with. What is that thing? The pen, right? So it starts out simple. Maybe some short-term memory issues. And if there's another really important take-home message here, as a society, we're almost taught to believe this falsehood, which is as we age, our memory goes. It's actually not true. If you study enough of the population, you realize that while things may slow down a little bit, might get a little harder to get out of bed in the morning, when you actually look at memory, there is a almost insignificant shift or decline, if you will, in memory as we get older. So if you are experiencing, we'll call them senior moments, word finding, name finding, some short-term memory issues. Let's say you go to a restaurant and the waiter comes over and introduces himself and takes your drink order and walks away and you say, excuse me, I don't remember that person's name. These are potential memory issues that may be tied back to your tinnitus and hearing loss, which ties back to the disconnect from the ear to the brain. So, I want to talk about tinnitus, hearing loss, and dementia and some of the actual science that's out there, right? I want you to really sort of walk away here saying, okay, I'm learning what tinnitus is. Oh, well, why so many people have tinnitus? Because a lot of people are getting older and living longer, which is great. What is tinnitus? It's a chronic neurologic condition. What are some of the other signs to be aware of in addition to the ringing in the ear? So that would be difficulty hearing and noise, some memory loss issues. But I want to really dive in a little bit on this memory issues and tinnitus. And what do we know? What does some of the research tell us? Well, what we've discovered in the last 10 years or so is that tinnitus, and here's the summary, tinnitus has the potential to physically change the brain, to physiologically change the brain, meaning change the way the brain operates, and functionally change the brain. By function, I mean like if you measure memory, if you measure speed, if you measure decision making, if you measure, processing, these decline or tend to be lower in patients with tinnitus. Let's talk a little bit about physical changes, okay? So here's a paper that came out a few years back. This is about 5 years old now, that started to look at the actual physical changes in the brain, right? So tinnitus appears to actually impact the physical structure of the brain. There's been some studies looking at tinnitus, looking at hearing loss and the brain tends to shrink. Cerebral atrophy can occur in people with hearing loss and tinnitus. Here was another paper, looked at the actual fine anatomy of the neuronal structures in the ear and things are in the brain, and things change in patients that have tinnitus. Let's talk about physiology. And this one I think is really going to hit home for people out there who are experiencing tinnitus and it's impacting your daily life. Here, I want to show you why. Okay. So you see a picture of a brain, and I've basically there was about 6 or 7 different studies that looked at brain imaging, looked at how the brain operates in people with tinnitus compared to people that don't have tinnitus. And essentially, they found these areas of change that I have noted as red and blue. The areas in red had increased neural activity, increased brain activity. Well, those areas in red, in case you don't know your brain anatomy, which is fine, I studied it for a long time. Well, down in the brainstem, lower on the screen, that controls your heart rate, that controls your breathing, right? A little bit higher up, some of those reds in that middle circle, that's more of your limbic system, your emotional response. So what did I just say? People with tinnitus tend to have increased heart rate, tend to have increased breathing rate, tend to have increased limbic system activity and emotional response. So if you're out there and you're one of those people who's having a pretty strong emotional response to your tinnitus, now you see why. Okay. Now the areas in blue, fascinating. There are parts of the brain that seem to have less activity in patients with tinnitus. Well, right up here in the front of the brain, where you see those 2 blue spots, that's up in the frontal lobe. These areas are responsible for decision making. It's called executive function, right? It's one of those very common tests that we run in people who have tinnitus. Well, they seems to be decreases in decision making abilities. If you go a little bit further back in the brain, you see those 2 little blue spots. Those are responsible for memory storage and memory recall. So yes, there is physiologic proof that the brain is changing the way it operates, and not for the good, right? Increased stress response, decreased cognitive responses. All right. Last but not least, functional changes. Okay. What we now know, and this has come out over just the last couple of years, okay, is there's now reports coming out that are showing that tinnitus is associated with cognitive impairments, declines in memory, declines in decision making, declines in short-term memory, declines in processing speed, right? And this study was fascinating because here's the summary, right? I mean, you're welcome to read the whole paper. This study that looked at thousands of patients found that tinnitus is strongly associated with an increased risk of cognitive impairments, including dementia, and the largest effect was in adults 60 years and older. Right? This to me is one of the most. There's about 10 papers like this, but this to me I think is one of the most impressive papers that said it most eloquently. That yes, tinnitus appears to be an early sign. Sometimes you'll hear the word biomarker. Tinnitus may be an early sign of cognitive impairment. And cognitive impairment is a major risk factor for developing dementia. Okay. Now, in terms of hearing loss and cognitive decline, right, there's been a number of studies on this in the last 10 to 15 years, many out of Johns Hopkins, right? And again, I won't bore you with all the details of each one of these studies, but basically what they have said is if you have untreated hearing loss, even at the earliest stage, right? I hear all sorts of funny adjectives. I had a patient recently say to me, I have a minor amount of hearing loss. I have a tiny amount of hearing loss. I said, okay, well, did you know that a tiny or a minor or a mild hearing loss nearly doubles your risk of developing cognitive decline and dementia? So you can no longer brush aside a little bit of hearing loss, right? And I believe it was my first book, Stop Living in Isolation, that had a chapter. A mild hearing loss is a major problem, okay? And the reason I'm walking you through this is because truly tinnitus and hearing loss go hand in hand. Except, here's the thing, because if you're out there still scratching your head at this, the thing is most patients pick one as their primary symptom. I'm not an intentional, but like patients will come in and say, oh man, this hearing loss is driving me crazy. I can't hear at work. I can't hear at home. You have some underlying ringing or tinnitus? Yes. And then you'll hear it the other way. Oh, this tinnitus is driving me nuts. I can't sleep. I can't focus at work. Okay. Are you having some difficulty with clarity or hearing in restaurants? Well, yeah, a little bit of that, right? So most people tend to pick one of those symptoms and make it their primary. That's why, but you can't really separate the two, right? Now, I just want to focus for a minute. I'm gonna breeze through this section, but I just think it's important that we stop and we say, okay, why is this so important to know about the connections of tinnitus and cognitive health? Well, I think Dr. Dale Bredesen, who's out in California, I think he said it best. Everyone knows someone who is a cancer survivor, but no one knows an Alzheimer's survivor. It's a very strong statement, right? It's a very strong point to make about the current state of affairs when it comes to cognitive decline and dementia. Because the way I read this is it's too late once you've been diagnosed. Yet, and I'm going to repeat something I said 10 minutes ago, nearly half of all cases of dementia are considered preventable. And that is a scientific consensus. Okay. So, right, what is dementia? What is cognitive decline? Look, I just want to make sure that we all have the same working definitions here. Dementia is like an umbrella term, right? There's different types of dementia. Alzheimer's is the most common. There's vascular. So if you have patients or if you're a patient with heart-related issues, right, you're at an increased risk. If you've got heart-related issues, if you've got hearing loss and tinnitus, you're at an even more increased risk. Diabetes increases your risk. Lewy body, which is often associated with Parkinson's, you have an increased risk of cognitive decline and dementia. Frontotemporal dementia. You know, I've heard some people say there's as many as 200 types of major neurocognitive disorder, which is a fancy way of saying dementia. Okay, it's more of an umbrella term. So I want to get to the meat and potatoes here when it comes to treating tinnitus and addressing hearing loss, whether you notice it or not. Okay. So if you're one of the lucky people who's like, I've got ringing, but my hearing's still good, great. Treat it now so that the hearing, right, stay ahead of it, slow the progression of the chronic neurologic condition, hold on to your hearing longer through treatment. Live with less ringing through treatment. Okay. So I believe that any tinnitus treatment program should be simple, should not require major lifestyle modifications. Now, look, if you find that diet, if you find that there are certain things in your life that trigger your tinnitus, make it worse, meaning, right? So let's say on a daily basis, your tinnitus is at a 4, but certain foods, certain situations ramp it up to a 7. Well, let's stop doing that, but I still want to treat the underlying four. Okay. And I believe that that should be simple. I believe it should be affordable. Now, affordability is a personal thing. And I try to tell most people that I would plan on budgeting about $2,000 a year to address your tinnitus. Only you can determine if that's valuable enough for you, right? But I promise you, I told you this is a promissory note. The longer you wait to treat your tinnitus, the worse it will get. Number one. Number two, the harder it will be to treat. So ideally, I can start treating your tinnitus at a 4 and bring it down to a 1 because it is harder to get you from a 9 down to a 4. Okay. So it better be proven. Now, what I'm talking about here, the acoustic stimulation provided through prescription tinnitus neurotechnology, is proven beyond doubt. Okay. Go as far back as the 2014 American Academy of Otolaryngology. That's like the big group of all the ENT doctors. They put forth a statement on best practices for treating tinnitus, or their guidelines for treating tinnitus. And they found that prescription hearing aid technology is the number one way to effectively reduce tinnitus. We've known this for over 10 years now. And every report since then. Did you know last decade, there were 34 independent peer-reviewed research studies that looked at the impact of prescription tinnitus technology, providing acoustic sound stimulation through proper hearing aids. In 100% of those 34 studies, there was an effective reduction of tinnitus. There was increased focus, better sleep, better hearing. I mean, everything was better in 100% of all studies published last decade, right? So that's proven. What's not proven is some of the stuff you see on the internet, right? And I don't even want to get into all of it, but I can promise you in the My Tinnitus Number network, right? So if you go to mytinnitusnumber.org, click on the button that says find a specialist. Every specialist on there has been trained in evidence-based proven treatment techniques to help reduce tinnitus in 90% of patients. Okay. Now, I believe that tinnitus treatment should also be guaranteed. Okay. And what I mean by that is my philosophy. And we have practices across the country at the hearing and brain centers, across the My Tinnitus Number network, where I try to share this philosophy of, I need this to work for you. I'm going to do everything I can. If you're fully invested, I'm fully invested, and I guarantee it will work. And if it doesn't work, I will continue to help you get the help you need, but I also don't want your money if it doesn't work. I think that seems like a reasonable thing to expect of somebody who says that they can help to treat your tinnitus. So, moving on. I want to quickly walk you through the recommendations. Or maybe I'll start with what is not recommended, right? Because here's the deal. Like I said, just search the internet. You'll find over 2 million results. Well, I'm going to give you the quick and dirty version of what is not recommended by the American Academy of Otolaryngology. Okay. Well, medication. This one drives me nuts. Okay. A lot of things drive me a little nutty in the world of treating tinnitus. There are no medications that have been shown to reduce tinnitus. Yet, I did read a number recently. It was something like 54% of people with tinnitus are prescribed medicine. Yet, it's not recommended. Now, maybe it's prescribed for something else, and maybe the hope is it will reduce tinnitus. But there is no medication, no pill available to reduce tinnitus. Okay? Surgery. As of late 2025, there is no surgery available to reduce tinnitus. You may see there's some new reports coming out about transcranial magnetic stimulation, which the way I describe it is it's like a defibrillator for the brain. There's like magnets you put near the brain, it like zaps your brain. Zap might sound painful. It's not painful, um, but it does almost like a little bit of a hard reset, attempting to basically shut down the neural feedback, the loop that's creating the tinnitus. There's some promising research out there, but there's no clinically available protocol. There's no widely accepted way that TMS can help with tinnitus. But my fingers are crossed for the future with this one. Direct electrical stimulation, taking electrodes and sticking them in the brain, has yet to really been shown to reduce tinnitus. Acupuncture, right? Right now it's on the list of not recommend, but really there's not enough data yet. Maybe it will work, maybe it won't. Now, look, that's not to say that if you undergo acupuncture and it helps you, that you should stop. I'm not suggesting that at all, right? If you have found something that works for you, even if it's on this list, and I'm saying, it's quote unquote not recommended, if it's working for you, that's great. Stick with it. I'm not suggesting you stop what you're doing. Okay. I am relaying to you the scientific consensus around what treatments do and don't work. Okay. Supplements. There is no supplement on the market that has been shown to reduce tinnitus, with one exception. Now, this should be intriguing to many of you who have looked into supplements. The only supplement with true science-backed data to say it reduces tinnitus is actually melatonin. Now, you might be saying, wait a second, isn't that the sleeping thing? Yes, it is the sleeping supplement. Okay. On the mytinnitusnumber.org, you can actually access Silent Ear, which is a version of melatonin. Now, but here's what the science says. Nobody, no good scientist, no good clinician believes that there's actually the ingredient of melatonin is somehow reducing the tinnitus. No, 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 no. Rather, melatonin is improving your sleep hygiene, therefore reducing stress, allowing you to wake well rested the next day and experience less tinnitus. Okay. So it's more that you're getting better sleep and experiencing less tinnitus, not that melatonin is somehow directly reducing your tinnitus. I find that one fascinating. And then, of course, there's sound machines. Look, getting a fan, right? I get this one too. Patient says, I went to the doctor and they said, buy a fan, listen to the radio as you go to sleep. I mean, look, I'm not telling you not to do that. If a fan in the room helps you fall asleep at night and helps reduce your perception of the tinnitus, great, go for it. Stick with it. Okay. But just going out and purchasing a sound machine does not reduce your tinnitus. If anything, I would consider it more of a distractor. So rather than focusing on the sound in your head, you're focusing on the sound in the room. If that works, okay, right? But now let's talk about the only two forms of treatment that are recommended. This one, I think this one's going to knock your socks off, even though I've kind of hinted at it. In terms of directly treating tinnitus, by directly, I mean the problem is in the breakdown from the ear to brain. Let's directly address this through acoustic stimulation. And sure enough, the only direct form of treatment that is recommended, strongly recommended by the medical associations, is prescription hearing technology. Premium prescription hearing aids have the ability to significantly reduce the experience of tinnitus. But it's not the only one. There's one other. But this falls under the category of indirect because this is more of a psychological approach. And this is cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay. Cognitive behavioral therapy comes in many forms. Okay. I'm going to mention three of them. One is simply couch therapy, right? Finding a therapist in your community that you go and talk to about how tinnitus is impacting your life and them helping you to reframe the tinnitus and take back psychological control. There are two apps that I strongly recommend that are based on the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy and tinnitus retraining therapy. You can find them in any app store. One is the Relax app, Rellax. Yes, it has two L's. Rellax, the Relax app. And the other is Oto, OTO. Okay. Those are the two apps that I recommend that are based on the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy, mindfulness, tinnitus retraining therapy. But again, I want you to see the word that I have underlined on the screen, which is indirect treatment. This is about addressing the psychological strain of tinnitus, whereas the prescription hearing technology is actually designed to treat the underlying condition, the underlying neurologic disorder. All right. So, some of the things to expect when it comes to treating tinnitus, okay? You're going to hear better. It's really that simple, okay? You're going to hear your best no matter what environment you're in. And we've known for 20 plus years, hearing better is really important for relationships. It's really important for self esteem. It's really important for quality of life, okay? And by the way, correct, proper prescription tinnitus and hearing technology can help you hear better even in the noisiest of environments. I didn't say perfect. I said it helps you hear significantly better. Okay. What else is on the screen? Remain independent. Okay. Tinnitus and hearing loss have the ability to strip you of your independence. Okay. Tinnitus and hearing loss have been linked to traumatic falls, which can strip you of your independence. Tinnitus and hearing loss have been linked to cognitive decline, which can strip you of your independence. Of course, you have reduced tinnitus on the screen, right? Now, I'll post a video of one of my patients because he's given us permission to do so. Normally I show it, but I'm not sure it's going to show up right in this webinar here. But Steve, and I love Steve's story because it's very emblematic. It's very representative of what we experience with patients. Steve, in his early 50s, came to us and said, look, I've got tinnitus. And not only is it driving me crazy, but it's driving my family crazy. Not because his family can hear his tinnitus, rather because the way the tinnitus was impacting him and his emotional state, that was then impacting his family. The amount of stress he felt, the anger, if you will, the lack of sleep, right? Nothing was going right for Steve, and it was impacting his family, and it all went back to his tinnitus. Well, we have a great video that I'll share with you. I'll include a link in this YouTube video that links to Steve's story and how Steve went from suffering with tinnitus to taking back full control of his tinnitus. For him, the vast majority of the time, the tinnitus is gone, doesn't even notice it's there. He's better, and more importantly, his relationship with his family is better. And last but not least, and I want to share this one with you because I've said this a few times, but I want to actually show it to you, is that treating tinnitus and hearing loss is so important. Actually, it's more than so important. It's the number one modifiable factor when it comes to reducing your risk of cognitive decline and dementia. That's pretty impressive, right? So the Lancet report, the Lancet Dementia Commission report, which first came out in 2017, updated in 2020, most recent was August of 2024, says that nearly half of all cases of dementia are considered preventable. And there are 14 modifiable lifestyle factors that can help you to reduce your risk of dementia, of which the number one modifiable factor, you see it right there on the screen, is addressing hearing loss and tinnitus. You know, I think I'm in the way. My little tile down here might be in the way, but behind that tile, You stop somebody on the street corner and you say, "Hey, what do you think it takes to reduce your risk of dementia?" You know what they're going to say: eat healthy, drink less, lose weight, exercise. Of course, all those things are important, right? But guess what? Alcohol is number 14 on the list. Reducing obesity is number 13 on the list. Hypertension is number 12 on the list. Diabetes is about number 8 on the list. Increasing physical activity, exercising. Of course, it's important, but it's only number 7 on the list. The number one modifiable factor that has the potential to reduce your risk of cognitive decline and dementia is to address your tinnitus and hearing loss and address it early. Last but not least, our promise within our network, across the My Tinnitus Number network, we have a promise that we make to our patients, a commitment that we make to our patients. Number one, I can guarantee you, if you've gone to anybody and said, I've got ringing in your ears, and they put you through a few tests, I can promise you they did not put you through our rigorous 7-step cognitive screening and diagnostic evaluation. It is the most comprehensive I've ever seen. We will leave no stone unturned across the entire My Tinnitus Number network. Low monthly payments, if that makes it easier to treat your tinnitus, right? I can't offer you something that's effective and proven and has a great track record of results in the research and in the clinical data, but make it unaffordable. Affordability is very important for us because we know it's important for you. Our program is all inclusive. We're going to do whatever it takes to help you live with less ringing, less noise in your ears, and hear better. All your follow-up visits, your annual exams, everything you need is covered and is part of your tinnitus treatment program. So you see why, if you go back to the beginning, why you can't just buy a product. You need support to specifically treat your tinnitus, because your tinnitus is not like anybody else on here. Over 1,200 people registered for this live webinar, and I can promise you, not a single one has the same tinnitus as anybody else that registered for this webinar. Full lifetime warranty. If your technology is to break down or get lost or whatever it may be, you are covered. Maybe a small deductible, but you're covered. We got you covered, okay? And we guarantee our results, right? And I think that is incredibly important. And I'm going to leave you with this, okay? I'm going to keep this really simple here. Aging is inevitable. And I truly want you to have as many candles on that birthday cake as you can possibly fit. But decline is optional. And so when it comes to tinnitus, if you're living with ringing, if you're living with noise, even if you're in the earliest stage, or if you're at that point where it is driving you nuts, I encourage you to seek treatment for so many reasons, most importantly of which, is to help you to prevent decline. Think of treating tinnitus as preventative healthcare. So I thank you for your time today. I appreciate you being with us. To everybody who registered, whether you watched it live or you're watching it after, thank you for your time. If you have any questions, you can submit them through YouTube. I would encourage you to go to mytinnitusnumber.org. Get your tinnitus number now. Try to find a local specialist on the mytinnitusnumber.org website. There's links to my book, free copies, right? I'm here to give out education. My newest book, Tinnitus Is Treatable, is going to be listed on that website. You can get a free copy of it. You just go through the My Tinnitus Number process. It's 10 simple questions, and you can take that to your tinnitus treatment provider and get started on living your best life with less ringing. Thank you so much for your time today. I truly appreciate it.